Welcome. Welcome to my page, Parenting Boys Peacefully. I have taken a hiatus this summer. So if you're wondering where I've been relaxing, rejuvenating, focusing on self-care. Those of you who know me know that I'm a big advocate for taking care of ourselves so that we can show up more often in ways that we feel good about with our kiddos. So so I basically disappeared and Seth's like, let's go live. And I'm like, all right, well, it'll be my foray back into social media. So I'm really excited to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Seth Perler of THIS. And he is here to talk to us about executive function. And he said, well, what do you want to talk about, Tosha? And I said, well, you've worked with lots and lots of kids. And since I focus particularly on helping parents of young boys. And just as a side, my mission of my business is to create a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time. So I said, Seth, hey, since I focus on this, I'm wondering if there are patterns that you have seen that maybe show up quite often in boys that you work with, and whether or not you've figured out how to help them. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So without further ado, Seth, why don't we just dive in and I get this question, and people sometimes are critical. Why are we just talking about boys? And that's a whole different thing. And I just want to say that my way of coming at this is I'm here to support parents of kids who move through the world as boys. So it doesn't matter what gender they were assigned at birth, and anything that Seth tells you is not going to be gender specific at all. This is stuff that's going to help your child, any child that you have that struggles with executive function. So Seth, what have you share some patterns with us? What do you see? Where are our boys struggling, and how can we help?
Yeah, well, thanks for that intro and prefacing things like that, because our concern is for all kids, but there are different patterns with different kids, and you asked me about patterns. So it's patterns that I see. It's not like I'm some authority on anything. It's just, this is what I see. I worked with thousands of families, and this is what I see. So one pattern that I see a lot more with boys is the social struggles, lack of friendships, lonely. That's been a really big one. They tend to be more into tech than girls, and having relationships through gaming or through online things, but less personal things. I see a lot where the consequences of that show up more in high school and college. And these kids really are struggling to really build relationships. Haven't had a lot of practice with it. And when it starts to matter to them, because a lot of times when they're younger, it doesn't matter as much to them, but there comes a point, usually when they're in adolescence, that this stuff starts to matter. They start to want friendships. So that's something that I've noticed. I've noticed that a lot more boys come to me than girls. A lot of parents of boys, it seems like they have a lot more trouble navigating school, and the prefrontal cortex develops more slowly. They are behind girls anyhow. So the way school is constructed is very executive function. Like, if you have decent executive function, it really rewards that. And if you don't, it assumes that it's your fault. And this is a huge problem that I see, that, they're just being lazy or not trying, or it's the boys' fault. So there's a lot of, they're not getting the support they need because it's assumed that they should just know this stuff. But there is a difference in brain development with boys and girls. Girls are succeeding in college more now. A lot of the boys that I work with that go to college or post high school really struggle. Like, things fall apart on every level. So their ability to launch is really, they're socially, as far as jobs and being able to have skills and being able to have self-care skills, basic self-care skills, or basic cleaning or cooking or life skills. And I guess another pattern I notice, and it's interesting because of what you said at the beginning, is that I noticed that a lot of people aren't talking about it openly.
People don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they want to just think that it's that the boys just aren't it's put on them rather than looking at like how, like if they're failing or struggling, it's looked at as that rather than how are we failing them.
Exactly. And that's a real gender difference. I'm glad you point that out because I see that over and over again as I work with families of young boys. There is just a pattern in society, and particularly in the education system, I see this a lot, where if a boy is struggling in a classroom, it's his problem. It's something's wrong with him. We need to fix him. And so much of the work that you and I do is about like, hang on, let's step back for a moment and see like, what can we do to perhaps shift the environment so that he is more able to succeed with the skills that he has, or that he maybe has more time to develop the skills that we're asking of him. Oftentimes we are demanding things that the child just isn't able to offer up yet. So this sounds kind of depressing. Do you want to talk about more patterns that you see before we
I mean, there
talk
are
about
more.
solution?
I made a list of probably 10 more, but I don't think we need to get into them because I think people who are resonating with this already know that we're speaking to them, and people that probably aren't listening right now. So
yeah, absolutely. And we all, those of us who have young boys, like we see them struggle and we see the statistics. I read a book, I'm blanking on the author and the title of the book. I read it just a few months ago. I read it in December, a pretty new book. And it was really interesting that I think the author was from the Brookings Institute. Excuse me if I'm remembering correctly. And one of the solutions to the challenges that he sort of pointed out that our boys are facing in society, and a lot of them have to do with executive function challenges. One of his solutions was to essentially start our boys a year later in school. And I thought that was really, really interesting because, it's a way I think that is non-shaming, right? Because it's different than holding a child back, like all their friends are moving forward, but they're holding back. It's like we recognize, hey, your brain is actually developing at a different rate. We don't expect you to have these skills that you are going to need to succeed in kindergarten, first grade. So let's put that off. Let's focus on play for another year, and let's put that off. So there are people thinking about solutions. So what are some solutions? What are some, or let's just say, I was listening to your video the other day about, I think it was like 13 different executive function thingies. Which of those do you feel like would give us the most bang for our buck in terms of if we were looking for solutions to help our boys really thrive in school? And for many of us, we're looking at the transition back to school right now.
I mean, that's such a loaded question in that all the executive functions work together. So it's like spokes on a wheel working together to spin the wheel. So, yeah. But I will give you, a reasonable answer, a better answer than that. But I will say that anything you do choose to work. Oh, meanwhile, I put your link, Tosha, in the chat if you want to put it in the Facebook chat. So we have a summit coming up this Friday, Executive Function Summit, and we'll pop the link in the Facebook chat if we can figure out how to do that. So basically, there are these different executive functions, and anytime you work on one, you're going to be impacting others. So that's a good thing. And anytime you neglect things, there are other, snowball consequences of it. But so as far as trying to help somebody build executive function skills, these all work together. When I start working with someone, I'll start in two ways. One is urgency. So if somebody comes to me in the middle of a semester and they're failing everything, or there's just like an urgent situation in their life, and that's when they start working with me, well, that's going to drive what we start working with. So depending on whoever's watching, what's most urgent for you, I wouldn't necessarily say start working on this particular executive function skill, but like if you're doing back to school right now, well, you're going to be working on planning and organizing and getting ready for the school year. And so you're working on a lot of different things. So I guess, but if I had to like pick one, if I had to pick like one of the big skill sets, this is so I guess if I had to pick one, I would go with the emotional regulation stuff.
Excellent, because that's where the families that I work with struggle the most. So let's dive in. Ding, ding,
Yeah.
ding. That was the right answer,
Yeah.
Seth.
Yeah.
Help us. What do we do? Because so many of our young boys are struggling with emotional regulation. Things don't go their way. They really struggle. They don't, they're not able to complete the task on time, or the way that they're being asked to do it, or they're not able to, I know these are all other executive function challenges, but they're not able to, find the things that need to go in their backpack, or plan their week in a way that doesn't leave them up till 2 a.m. the night before something is due. And then we have these huge emotional outbursts. So help us with the emotional regulation bit. What can we do?
Yeah, and I have to go in 10 minutes, unfortunately, because I have a call right then. But
Okay.
just for everybody watching, so that sorry about that. But the emotional regulation piece, it's me, the first thing that we do, Tasha, with emotional regulation in an ideal world is learn about our own emotional regulation. And most of us adults, myself included, although I've been working on this for longer, but we are not taught or brought up to be aware of how to regulate emotions in healthy ways. Some of us come from really secure families where we do, but most of us really don't know much about emotional regulation, about articulating what's going on in our nervous system, have language around our nervous system or our feelings or our emotions, have ways where we can communicate with people and really get at the root of it. And so often when I'm working with a kid, like we'll be talking about something and they'll say something like, let's say it's a new kid and they say, I hate math. So I want to stop right there and I want to be like, oh, you use the word hate. What's that about? What does hate feel like? Like, what do you mean you hate math? Where does that feel like in your body? And often kids are not aware of that. They don't know what that means. And we want them to have tools to start to articulate, what does that mean? What is going on in my body? What is going on in my mind? What are my thoughts around this thing? And how can I work with those feelings? Are they feelings that I do want to follow? Because many feelings we want to follow. Are they feelings that I don't want to follow? Because I do not want to be ruled by this anger towards math or whatever the case may be. I need to acknowledge that feeling that I don't feel like doing this, but that I do want to learn these skills and I have these goals in life. And so we have to learn tools around doing that. But when the adult is learning their own emotional regulation and they're doing their own work on themselves and they're getting their own therapist, even if you don't think you need it, or a counselor or support groups or books or meditation practices or mindfulness or whatever. And we're starting to learn as adults what's happening in our nervous system and how we already have good tools to regulate, how we have dysfunctional or maladaptive tools, what we're doing about that. When we're working on that stuff, we are modeling for them, even if we're not even talking about it. Our nervous system is modeling to our kids that we are more regulated, that we have better tools. We don't even have to say a word. Of course, we're going to want to, and we're going to want to model in better ways, but just doing our own work is modeling for them a lot of how to regulate better. So that's part of how we do it, is doing our own work. And then part of how we do it is directly instructing or helping or guiding them to learn specific tools, like literally just to check in. So I know that it's late for you, Tasha, and I'm going to say, let's check in. Like, how does your nervous system feel right now?
I feel good, actually. I'm kind of excited to have this foray back into sort of the public sphere after kind of being a hermit over the summer. And I love to talk to you always. And I had a really fun call with a bunch of dads earlier. So I'm feeling sort of, hyped about my work right now. So I'm good. And I
And when you
also am
say
wanting to go
hyped,
back.
where do you feel that in your body? And you don't have to answer this, but that's like
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
when you ask me
I
like
feel
for
like
what,
movement.
so if I say give them tools, what does that mean? This is a tool, is to ask you like,
Right.
where do you notice that in your body, and help you learn to articulate that. What you just said was awesome. So starting dialogue, like listening to people. And I know I'm not like letting you complete your thoughts and stuff. And I know you were going to say something as well. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'm not letting you complete yours either, so it's all even playing field. So I want to go back to that kid who's saying, "I hate math." Walk us through it. So I get, yes, we need to do our own emotional work, but let's say, I'm calm, I'm regulated, and I have a kid who's got a math assignment due tomorrow or a math test at the end of the week, and he's sitting there crumpling his paper and saying, "I hate math."
Right. So the default for most of us is to try to convince them why they shouldn't hate math, or why it's important, or how much easier it'll be if they just get the stupid assignment done, or whatever. So we're going into logic and reason world to try to get them to execute, to try to motivate them, or whatever the case may be, or to threaten them with punishment or with promised rewards, or whatever the case may be. None of those things give them skills, executive function skills, or skills to regulate the emotional experience that they are having. So we need to validate that that experience that they're having right then. Wow, you hate math. You want to crumple your paper. What's going on? How can I be helpful? What do you need? You know, in your mind, you may be like, oh my gosh, this thing's got to get in, or they're going to be taking summer school, or blah, blah, you know, but that is not the appropriate, that is not a useful conversation in that moment. That is a useful conversation when there's regulation.
Right.
That is not a useful so in that moment, I'm like, wow, what's going on? What are you noticing in your body? What are the thoughts? I really want to validate. Validate does not mean that I necessarily agree, but I'm telling you what you feel is valid. What's up with this? Where does this come from? One thing I do, Tasha, a lot is when a kid will say something like that, I'll say, do you remember the first time you felt like you hated it? And it's amazing because, and this can be in all sorts of contexts. It can be with math, but it can be, you can say, what was
With
the
anything.
first time you experienced X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
It could be a class, it could be a social situation. But a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, in first grade, I had this teacher who, and they know. And just to validate that and acknowledge that, like, that you still may have been talking for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes and haven't done one single math problem on the thing that's due tomorrow, and they got to get to bed. And but that you're going to get so much more traction from that sort of holding space, helping them articulate, helping them feel seen, than you are with the pressure tactics that we use.
Yeah, yeah. And I like to remind parents, like, this is a marathon. It feels like an emergency in the moment, right? Like you said, like the math test is tomorrow or whatever. But in reality, your relationship with your child and their executive function skills and their grit, their ability to work through something that's challenging, even if it doesn't get done in time for the test, that all is so much more important in the long run than an A or a B.
Yeah. And these conversations take a long time too. Like you were asking about this particular type where I would take it. Like I then want to be taking it into, what have you done in the past that's really helped you move through stuff like this? Because I don't just want to like get them to do their homework done. I want them to be, you know, 4 days later having some experience and them going into their own self-reflection because they just had practice doing that, and them thinking on their own, wow, what have I done that has helped me in this type of situation? Like starting to connect the dots that they have tools, by walking them through. I mean, it would take a long time to sort of explain that, but that's kind of, you know, I want them to be taking the buy-in and the ownership of the conversation. I'm guiding it, but I want them to realize that they have agency. They have tools already. They have skills already. They're not very practiced. They don't know how to consciously access them yet, but that's what we're getting to.
Right. And we want them to have the intrinsic motivation to develop those.
Is that similar to how you might approach it? Or?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I'm all about, I'm really all about a more somatic experience of healing. And so a parent who would come to me with that scenario, you know, I hate math, I would really put the emphasis on them focusing on listening, saying very, very little at all. So I wouldn't even start by going into that conversation that you had. So it's almost like the ideas that you gave are a step after, right? If the families that I'm working with are probably listening to you and going like, oh yeah, I'm going to say like, so how does it feel in your body? And they're going to be like, feeling my body, you know, and they're going to toss the paper in your face or something, or call you a name. And they're not going to sit there and have a conversation like I did and get all excited about my body and whatever. And so the work that I do is almost like a precursor to this.
Well, and I would do the same thing too, scaffolding, but that's why I said, like, if the conversation is 10, 15, 30 minutes, like this is not quick stuff. This is holding space for somebody. Really, and me, my relationship with them, I'm not the parent, so I'm coming from a very grounded nervous system. I don't have any attachments to the story, and But yes,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
takes, this stuff takes a lot of time.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of the time, Seth.
Thank
I know
you.
that you
Yeah.
have another meeting. I have so much more that I want to ask you, which I don't have time to ask you, unfortunately, but I believe that you are going to post this video on your YouTube channel.
If we can
for
figure it
people
out,
to-
I'll post it to YouTube. Actually, I'll stop that